Good morning if you're in the UK, and good evening to those in Australia. Thank you for coming for this event, which is being co-hosted by the Winston Churchill Trust in Australia and the Churchill Fellowship in the UK. My name's Katie and I'm Grants Manager at the Churchill Fellowship. I would imagine most of you would already be familiar with the fellowship, but I'll just give a brief summary for those of you who aren't. So internationally, there are 3 trusts which award Churchill Fellowships, and we are based in the UK, Australia and New Zealand. Churchill Fellowships are awarded to passionate individuals across a range of sectors to support them to learn from best practice in other countries. Fellows then bring what they've learned back to their home country to share and implement their findings in order to make positive change in society. So from that, today we are very pleased to have 2 Churchill Fellows with us who connected over their shared interest in care farming. Those fellows are Joy O'Neill, who is a UK Churchill Fellow, and Judy Brewer, an Australian Churchill Fellow. Joy and Judy will share their fellowship projects with you today, and then we'll have time for some questions following their presentations. We'll wait until they've both delivered their presentations and then start with some questions. You're very welcome to add these to the Q&A box as and when you think of them throughout the presentations. So first we'll begin with Joy O'Neill. Having worked in teaching, Joy was first introduced to the concept of care farming while supporting a young person who was at risk of being excluded from school. From that point on, Joy has been invested in the benefits of care farming and how it can support vulnerable individuals. Through extensively investigating the topic, Joy became interested in the wider benefits of care farming beyond the clients themselves. It was this that led her to apply for a Churchill Fellowship, and she was awarded in 2020 for her project. Her project focuses on care farming and its benefits for the farmer, the local community, and the rural economy. Unfortunately, like all 2020 fellows, Joy faced delays in getting her fellowship off the ground due to the pandemic. However, we're pleased to say she was able to take up the offer of a digital fellowship, and this has enabled fellows to complete their research online, and that actually ended up offering some benefits in that Joy was able to expand her research to include more countries. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Joy.
Thank you. So thank you very much for that introduction, and hello everybody, wherever you are. Lovely to see you this morning. And Rose is very kindly going to do my slides for me. Thank you, Rose. So as Katie says, I decided to look at the benefits for farmers, the local community, the rural economy. Next slide, please. So what is care farming? So I just wanted to share this with you first, because I think it's important before we start. Care farming is the use of farming practices to support individuals or groups with items such as health, mental health, social or educational care services. And there's 3 key elements that have to be included. And if you look at the research into care farming, it comes from this. So you need to have that it's purposeful work, that it's outdoors, and that it's got that sort of social interaction. Next slide, please. Okay, so I just thought I would talk briefly about background to how I came to apply for the fellowship. So I'm 20 years plus in education, in teaching, have always worked predominantly with children and young people with special educational needs and disabilities. And in 2018, I was supporting a young man that was at risk of exclusion from school. And we'd placed him in a care farm because he was keen to go to agricultural college. And we'd sort of come up with an agreement that if he would stay in school to at least do his maths and English GCSE, then we would help him get his place at college. And I went to visit a care farm as part of putting this package together for him. And I was completely hooked. I just thought, you know, what a wonderful resource. This is amazing. And I then decided that this was something I wanted to research further. I spent quite a lot of time visiting care farms across the southeast of England. And when I was there, I could really see the benefits for the clients, but I began to think, is there actually a benefit for the farmer, for the person that's setting this up? So that's why I decided to apply to Churchill to investigate this further. Next slide, please. So as Katie's already said, unfortunately, I couldn't travel, but this has worked out better, I think, because initially I was only going to visit Italy and Norway and Ireland. But as soon as I realised that a digital fellowship was possible, I would then realise that, you know, I can increase the countries that I want to work with. So my countries changed ever so slightly in that I swapped Norway for Austria, but I also added Israel, Australia and the US. So prior to doing my digital fellowship, I just went back and checked in with some UK farmers, I guess a bit of a focus group. What were the things that concerned them about setting up care farming? And they all pretty much answered identically. And the issues that they identified were health and safety concerns on the farm, the built environment. And what I mean by that is, what were they going to need to adapt on the farm in order to take people? Funding, you know, where were they going to get the funding to do all of this? And also, did they feel that they were adequately skilled and trained to do this? And then finally, if I've done all of this, if I've got training, if I've got the farm ready, am I actually going to get clients, and is this going to pay? Next slide, please. So how did I come to work with Judy? Well, when I was awarded my fellowship, on the letter, there was a little line that said, if you're going to be travelling to Australia or New Zealand, you might want to get in touch with the relevant trusts there and find out if they have any fellows sharing the same area as you. And although at that time I wasn't planning to research in Australia, I did reach out and said, you know, do you have anybody? I had a look on their website. I spotted Judy. I contacted them. I said, do you think it's possible that I could speak with Judy? And they put us in touch. And it's been brilliant, because throughout the pandemic, we've been speaking a couple of times a month. We've been sharing our thoughts on our research. What were we going to do? When were we going to do it? The countries, did we need to adapt? Yeah, and I think we've become good friends, and we've had lots of opportunities to chat since March 2020. So I'm really pleased that I've been able to connect with Judy over this topic. Next slide, please. So the outcomes from the research. So when I was actually speaking with the participants across the 6 countries, I brought up the 4 areas that I'd identified and sort of said, you know, tell me about this. I also wanted to find out what were the benefits to them? What benefits did they see in the local community? What benefits did they see in the rural economy? I think what struck me was those 4 issues were universal across all 6 countries. It was how they decided to mitigate it that I think was the key thing. And the key message they were saying for farmers back in the UK is, yes, there are concerns, yes, there are challenges, but don't let it put you off setting up a care farm within your working farm, because there's absolutely ways that you can manage it. The benefits for the farmers themselves, they felt that they had become part of a community that perhaps they weren't previously. They felt that it had benefited them personally with being able to support people, and you know, in some cases it had reduced their own isolation or loneliness. They knew that they had bought other sort of farming companies or feed supplies or cafes or whatever in the local area into the mix, so they could see how they were making these links with the community. Interestingly, I don't think any of the participants had thought about how they were making a benefit to the rural economy. And yet in some cases, particularly with some of the residential care farms in the US, they had then suddenly become the second biggest employer in the area. So they were having a massive impact on the economy. But this was just something that they hadn't considered. And I then put together, a few recommendations of what I was suggesting going forwards for, following on from my research. And I have been able, well, I shall tell you in a minute, to make some steps with these already. But the gist of it was, farmers need to have really clear information to help them make informed decisions. They wanted a comprehensive training program because they said, look, we're farmers, we don't necessarily understand funding, setting up charities, health, social care, etc. The idea of this coordinator, so this liaison person, somebody that was there to support the farmers, but also work with commissioners and found clients, that was something that was really key. And that's something that I felt needed more investigation. I also felt that there was a lot of care farmers that were really interested in sustainable food and farming. So that was something that I felt needed to be investigated further. And I hope that there might be an opportunity for sort of a peer-to-peer global either research facility or care farmers organisation, or potentially both. Next slide, please. So the follow-up projects that I'm working on at the moment, well, I'm very fortunate in January to be awarded an additional Churchill Fellowship grant, a COVID action grant. And I'm looking at 3 specific phases following on from my research. So phase 1 is what I'm calling family research. Most of the farms that I spoke to took predominantly people over 16. There were concerns about taking younger people, and I'd only come across one farm that ever took families, but in a very sort of limited capacity. So that was something that I wanted to explore further. And I've been, researching with a smaller group of participants, 15. I'm just writing that up at the moment. My phase 2 was this really robust training package. And I'm really pleased to announce that I've designed and developed 2 pilot days that we're running in the Cotswolds in partnership with a charity there called Farm Ed, one in July, one in October. And if these go well, then we hope to roll this out as sort of a bigger program going forward. So these initial ones are an introductory day, but I would hope to put a more robust package together, because in some parts of the countries that I researched, farmers were getting up to 5 full days training before they took people onto the farm. And then my phase 3 is to do a small coordinator project. So I'm taking 5 farms and taking them through 20 weeks of additional support to take them from, I think I'm interested in care farming, what do I do, right the way through to, okay, I'm ready to take my first client. And I've got 4 farms signed up already. I'm just looking for the 5th and planning to start that in the summer. I also set up a sustainable food and farming working group. I set that up through Oxcan, which is another organisation that I'm part of. And we've got some peer-to-peer visits going ahead this year. And we've been having online meetings and online training sessions, reaching out to people in the community, locally, regionally, nationally. And I'm delighted to announce that we've just been made part of the Sustain Alliance. So that means we're going to be working with many other UK-based food and farming organisations to look at research and policy and what's the best for sustainable food and farming going forwards. And then finally, I'll be working with 2 UK fellows, John and Mary, later in the year, and we're planning to do an international care farming symposium. And this will be 3 days, one online, so that we can incorporate our overseas guests and participants and get, everybody that wants to be involved, and a face-to-face day in the south and a face-to-face day in the north. So look out for more information on that later in the year. But thank you for your time today, and I'll now hand back.
Katie, I think you're muted.
Apologies. I'll repeat that. Thank you so much, Joy. That was fantastic. If you've already thought some questions for Joy, you're welcome to submit them now in the Q&A box at the bottom, and we'll come to them at the end. Or you can raise your hand if you prefer to ask a question verbally, and we'll come to you. But now we'll move on to Judy Brewer. So Judy is a nationally recognised speaker and writer, particularly with regards to autism and neurodiverse families. Judy lives on and manages a beef property and has combined farming with a career in education and advocacy roles. In 2019, Judy was awarded her Churchill Fellowship to further develop a business template for care farming in Australia by investigating social farming operations in the UK, Ireland, and the Asia Pacific region. Much like Joy, Judy's fellowship was delayed by the pandemic. Over the past couple of years, she's been networking with others in the field, and Judy's care farm plans have progressed, with visits to her farm occurring regularly now as she scales up the project to a sustainable business. So Judy will depart on her fellowship later this year. I'll now hand you over to Judy so she can tell you more about her work.
Thank you, Katie. Let me share my screen. Hopefully it will come up where it needs to be. Seriously. There we go. Now, that was just so interesting, Joy. Every time I hear you speak, I learn more. And I want to also say just how much I've appreciated the collaboration. I've been very lucky. It was very lucky that we found each other so early in the piece. And I think it sustained us through what's been quite a difficult delay in getting to where we wanted to get to with our fellowships. So today, as Katie mentioned, I'm yet to travel on my fellowship, so it's not finished. I haven't written up my final report. It's been delayed 2 years, and I'm hoping that that will all happen this year. But in the meantime, I've started running in a very small way my own care farm on my farm at Mudgegonga. So my story now is really taking you through some of what I do and how that's affected me and why everyone on farming should be thinking about doing this, because it's actually not that difficult. So here we go. Why do I do what I do? Well, my fellowship, the aim is to create and expand care farming practices in Australia, particularly for autistic adults with acute anxiety. And that's a picture of me with my beautiful son, Harrison, who is the inspiration for so much of what I do in my life, and who took me out of my career in economics and farming and moved me into disability and farming. And so I'm very grateful to him for opening up a world that is far richer than I ever imagined. This is where I live, at Grosotto, Mudgegonga, and I don't expect even the Australian people watching to know where it is, but northeast Victoria, actually a mountainous part of Australia, and actually very hot at the moment, even though we tend to be the cooler parts of Australia. This is the house that has been in our family now. My great-grandparents built it in 1878, and when I say that to a UK audience, they just go, blah, what's that? 1878, gosh, my garage was 1878, but in fact, in Australia, 1878 is quite significant. This was my Italian-Irish great-grandparents' farm here, and you can see the house in the background, and they settled here in the 1870s. They came to Australia for the gold rush, but they missed that and decided instead to become farmers and have a large dairy farm. So it's a very special thing for me that I farm that original place, the original settlement, and it has enormous spiritual meaning to me. But imagine the spiritual meaning that it has for our traditional owners of our land. And I live in an area that, although we don't have very many of our traditional owners active, in fact, tomorrow I have 2 elders coming out to the farm to talk to me about the history of the farm and about some traditional practices that we might be able to incorporate into our care farm. So I now acknowledge very much the Indigenous people of our area, the Jalamatang, the Waveroo and Dadaroa people, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. These are some rock paintings that are very near my property. They're something we consider very precious, and we need to learn so much more. So that's part of what I'm hoping to bring. So care farming, Joy's talked very eloquently about the benefits of care farming, how it works. In Australia, what I found was that no one had even heard of care farming. It's not a thing that is very central to agriculture. It's not something people are very familiar with. They probably are familiar with, in fact, how it looks, because having grown up on the farm, I've always known when people come to the farm, they relax. You know, the minute they get in the door, they say, "Oh, breathe the fresh air. Look at the birds and the trees. I feel better already." And so I've always been very aware that when people come and stay, they start to de-stress, and they start to realise that, you know, maybe life doesn't have to be quite as focused and busy and unnecessarily layered at times, and that you do need to actually think about health, nutrition, the environment, and the things that farming can bring you. But care farming's, you know, been around, of course, forever, and it really just has developed between 2 very traditional sectors of society, agriculture and health. And in fact, if we go back to Hippocrates, here we are, the Hippocratic Oath, 460 BC, he was born, and he said, "Nature itself is the best physician." Again, this is my farm. Any night that I go out there, yes, there are kangaroos, way too many of them, let me tell you. And there's usually wombats and a lot of other animals, and a lot of feral animals as well. But we are surrounded by nature here, and it's a great privilege. So in recent times, somehow we have disconnected from nature. We used to see this agriculture health connection play out in many ways. In the Middle Ages, you know, we'd be familiar with stories about monasteries that had big gardens, hospitals that were in rural areas where people went. People with disabilities working farms in Spain and France is an enormous history of this. People used to talk about taking the waters when they were ill, or they'd go to the mountains to an asylum to get well. The hygienists of the 19th century talked about sunshine, fresh air, farm labour, and in fact did a lot of research into how that affected health. But somehow, I think in the last 100, 150 years, industrialisation and specialisation seems to have separated this notion of agriculture and health. And, you know, as a farmer and a 5th generation farmer, you know, we're responsible for a lot of that too, because we haven't treated the land with as much love and care as we should have. So there's this enormous divide, and I see it in Australian life particularly. I think people think of Australia as a very rural place. In fact, it's a very urbanised country. Very few of us live on farms, and we're spread geographically a long way apart. So there is an enormous divide. Many people in Australia have never been to a farm, and perhaps it's the same in the UK. And so here's my farm, and I'm now, you see the blue's gone in the background because I decided that it was just going to clutter up these little run of pictures that I have of where I live. These are my beautiful cattle. So alongside my care farm, I actually manage and own a beef cattle stud, a Pole Hereford stud. And it's not quite as green as that at the moment. It's perhaps a bit more like the middle picture, but I live surrounded by mountains and these beautiful cattle. These are my best friends, my 2 dogs, who come out the paddock with me every day and keep me sane. They're probably going to bark in a minute because they're sitting at the back door. That's Lola and Jewel. And this is what I wake up to in the mornings: parrots in the trees, on the ground. My pet echidna, Spike, who comes in for a drink when it's hot. And I see echidnas out the paddock all the time. And I see these creatures too, the wombats, and the cows are always chasing them around. You see on the right-hand side that our wombats are sometimes not as healthy as they might be. They, in fact, carry a lot of disease and mange. So they're not quite the cute, cuddly creatures that we imagine. And here we go, some beautiful frogs, spiders, butterflies. These are incredible pollinators that I encourage. And this is another project I have on the farm, which is my bees. So I also have honey and do beekeeping. So I had to learn that through the pandemic, and we were lucky to extract a beautiful, beautiful flow of honey last weekend. And of course, there's chooks and ducks, and there's horse paddocks, and there's a vegetable garden, and there's worms and worm farms in old baths. And we integrate the compost and the vegetables in together, and every day we get this sort of harvest that we can share with the community and with people in need. And at the care farm, we use that harvest to create a community lunch each day that people are here. We also propagate native trees. So we collect seeds from the native trees, the eucalypts, and we grow them out, and then we plant them back again. And in the last 2 years, I've planted over 2,000 of these out, and I hope to do many, many more, depending how many helpers I get. And here are some of my helpers. This is a volunteer. This is when we get the trees to the stage that we can actually plant them out and revegetate the land, which so needs revegetation, because unfortunately we've lost a lot of trees through drought, through poor farming practices, through sawmilling, through not understanding how important they are in terms of our soil, our carbon, and in fact just general shade and well-being. And of course for biodiversity. So I'm now joining up our trees into great corridors so that the animals can actually be protected right through to the water zones and to the tree forests. And so that's where I live, and they're my beautiful girls. And I just feel so privileged to have the opportunity to live on a place like this with a history that is both, goes back, you know, to 3,500 years to those rock paintings, but also 150 years in my family. And to be able to share that with people is an absolute delight. So care farming for me was just the logical thing to do once I got to a certain age where I could do it. It combines my 30 years working in disability and in education with my love for the farm and my desire to actually make a difference to people, people's mental health and people's ongoing well-being. I've had my highs and lows in life, and I've also had mental health issues. And I know when I came back to the farm at various points in my life when I was away working, and then I'd come home, it was the greatest healer for me. And so sharing it with other people is something that gives me great joy. But it's not easy to put together a care farm. And I'm finding that in Australia, there's not really a template. It's incredibly difficult to start the job and to find others that are actually on the same journey. So connecting with Joy through the Churchill Fellowship has been a way that I have created now a network of people that are interested in doing the same thing, and I'm very keen to pursue that further. So I'll leave it there, and I'm very interested in your questions.
I'll remember to unmute myself this time. Thank you so much, Judy. It was lovely to hear more about your work and see those incredible images. I'm really looking forward to hearing how your travels go. So I'll now hand over to Rose Clapham, who's Manager of Fellow Engagement and Development at the Australia Churchill Trust, and we'll take your questions.
Hi everyone, and thank you so much, Katie. Judy and Joy, it's wonderful to hear your stories, hear all the exciting things you have coming up in the near future. And I can't wait to receive a photo of Judy with Joy when you do make your way over there. It's going to be wonderful.
Yeah.
Now, we do have our Q&A window here that you are most welcome to pop questions into. I'll read them out and our lovely fellows will be able to answer those for you. I've got a few here that were submitted in advance though, so we might kick off with that if that's okay. So, Judy, why do you think there are so few care farms in Australia compared to Europe and other countries?
Yeah, Rose, it's an interesting question, and one that I've actually thought a lot about. You would think that Australia, being, often thought of as an agricultural country, and certainly we're a very big agricultural exporter, and we have these farming traditions, but care farms have not really taken off here, and we've had some very large ones, sort of often run by large charities or a government-run ones, and they don't tend to be sustainable for a long period of time. Very much dependent on an income stream that, has a grant round and suddenly the money's not there, or there's some whim that takes the money away and they don't continue. And even in the probably the 5 years that I've been looking at care farming, I've seen care farms open and shut. The pandemic had a terrible impact on a lot of small care farms where they couldn't have visitors. So therefore, their whole business model failed for that. So but it fascinates me that in Europe, we have thousands of care farms, and it's sort of part of the, actually just part of the makeup of agriculture. And of course, it's a society that has developed in a different way to what we have. But I think it gets back to those things that Joy mentioned. Unfortunately, we have a lot of health and safety considerations. They are, even today, I was doing a risk assessment for a young fellow to just get on the Kubota bike, the side by side, and I thought, do I have a risk assessment for this fellow to hop on? And I didn't, so he couldn't, and I need to now, before he comes back, create a whole plan around his being able to participate in something that gives him a lot of joy. So there's the health and safety aspects. There's this enormous cost of infrastructure. So creating the all access pathways, the fencing, all the things that we need to do to make the visits enjoyable. There's, of course, this incredible inconsistent funding, all the things that Joy talked about. And the worst thing for us, I think, is the lack of a training package, a lack of people to actually teach us what to do, and that's why it's been such a wonderful thing to connect to Joy. And I can't wait to see this next stage roll out, because I will be pinching everything I possibly can.
Wonderful, thank you. And I was going to say as well that with that sort of paperwork side of things, I think it absolutely is, once you have that form, you have that template, it does speed things up, because the next individual that comes along that wants to be on that bike, you've got the form ready to go. So hopefully it does, it's just a matter of time before it's the new normal here as well. Have another question here, speaking of putting recommendations in place, one for Joy. How were your recommendations received at your follow-up focus groups with farmers?
Yeah, so they were well received by the people that were able to attend the focus groups. I think, they were pleased that the issues had been raised. I think they were pleased to see that there were potentially ways to mitigate it. But I think the key thing that came out was they were saying, look, we're farmers. We really don't understand a lot of this area. So the idea of having somebody, as in, for example, the Irish model, to be the coordinator and support you and take you through this, they really like the idea of that. And to also feel that if they were going to do a training package, okay, let's do a proper training package so that we feel comfortable to go forwards. So yes, I think the people that I've spoken to, it's been received well. Of course, I would always like to be able to get the message out further.
Wonderful, thank you. And that's always the right response, I think, when people say yes, but tell me more. I have a question here from one of our local fellows, Fiona. She's doing her fellowship soon, I think, as well. Fiona says, Judy and Joy, thanks for your research. Super interesting, and it would be great to see more care farms. I agree. Have you been to any of the Rudolf Steiner-based farms? I think these may be a type of care farm. There is or was one in Sydney called Warra Farms. I think I'm saying that correctly.
Oh, well, yes, I haven't been to it because, of course, the pandemic has stopped us travelling so much. And I have done a lot of research into the care farms in Australia. So there are some Steiner farms that are based on, the same sort of holistic principles that care farming is based on, and educational principles. So there's, they're not, the thing that perhaps differentiates them is that mine is very much what I want to do with my farm, and my template is integrated into agriculture, so that it's not just people that are set up a care farm because of that purpose. It's people that are actually have a farming industry going on. And for me, that's my cattle. So that's what my income comes from. That's what I do. And the care farm sort of integrates into to make it possible that you don't have to be just a standalone organisation doing care farming. That it actually, and Joy talked about that at the start, how do farmers get a template where it becomes possible for us to do this and farm at the same time. So the Steiner principles very much I've looked at, but they're not as based in agriculture as in holistic health and education. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And thank you for that question, Fiona. We have one here that sort of dovetails nicely into that for you, Judy, as well. Can you carry on your normal farming operations and also manage the care farm?
Yeah, and see, that I think is really the crux of how I see care farming roll out in Australia. I think because if we're subject to the sort of vagaries of grant rounds and short-term funding, it won't work. And we've seen that. We've seen so many open and close. I think what we have to do is be able to find a way where farmers can derive their income and sustainability from the business that they have. So whether it be, cropping or dairy or pigs or whatever it is, and the care farm helps feed into that, because again, there's synergy there. Because clearly, if you're, say for me, I have the worm farm and the composting and all these things that end up on my real farm on the other bit. But for my insurance and for all that bureaucracy, I actually separate the two things. So I have two businesses, but they do feed each other as well. So it's working out that balance that makes it so tricky. But I think one without the other doesn't work as well.
Could I chip into that as well?
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes. So what I looked at in Austria, so that was really interesting because the government stepped in, because a lot of farms were being sold, but they were being sold to people that were using them as like weekend places to live. And there was a concern about gentrification of the sort of rural community. And the government stepped in to sort of say, how can we support farmers to be able to stay farming? Because a lot of farmers in Austria at the time, they were having to send a family member off-site to work because they couldn't manage to do both. And they set up their care farming, but they've done it with a lot of training, with accreditation. They've worked directly with commissioners in education, healthcare, social care. So that now farmers often get a 5-year contract in advance, and they know that on X and Y day of the week they've got their their care farm clients coming in, and that they've got this funded money 5 years in advance. And then on the other days of the week they're focusing on their agriculture. So absolutely, it can be done. But again, like Ireland, they kept their client days to half a day, 1.5, 2 days a week, and then did their farming the rest of the week. That also manages health and safety.
I guess you just have to hope that the weather lines up with that schedule as well. I've got a question here from another fellow, one of our agricultural champions, Mike, who says, do any care farms anywhere in the world have sufficient income to run without support, government or otherwise? Are any commercially viable as a standalone organisation?
I think that's a different experience for Joy, and so I'll let you talk, Joy, and then perhaps I could talk about the Australian experience.
Yes, so some of the what I would call residential care farms in America, they're called, they are set up as charitable, but they're run with a business model. People tend to go with quite significant mental health issues, adults only. They will often stay 6 to sort of 18 months on the farm. They have a combination of clinical support and they do a lot of farm work and get skills for when they transition back into their communities. People have to pay in order to go there. Sometimes they can raise charitable money to be able to give sort of bursaries, but that's very much as sort of, I guess, a commercial model, but within sort of, I guess, charitable aims. But I think most of the places I've spoken to have had some kind of work. Now, whether it's a government grant or whether it's a private grant that's assisted them, I guess you could argue that maybe places in Europe, once they'd had the government support to go through the accreditation, then they were in a viable position, but they absolutely needed that support to get there. Hope that answers that.
Yeah, and Mike, I think in Australia, I'd have to say I'm not aware of any that are commercially viable without any additional support, but someone might prove me wrong. I just haven't come across them yet. Except I have come across one group of people who are doing it in a sort of a less, not a very broad way, but they are people that are providing farming services through the National Disability Insurance Scheme. So we have in Australia, for our UK participants, Australia has a scheme that allow a really terrific modern scheme around empowering people with disabilities to make choices how they use their funding. And I know a few people who are doing equine therapy, fee for service, equine therapy on farms. So people come out with disabilities, come out for the day, and they pay through their disability package to do the service, so that the person providing the service is actually making their income from that. And it is a commercial transaction, and then that helps them, of course, with our tax system, that helps them maintain their horses and their equipment and their feed and all the other things they do. And I've seen that work very successful. And I've also seen it in terms of we have a farm, an open farm near here that is a commercial business. And I can't see any reason why care farms can't be a commercial business, because there's an enormous desire from people to actually get out of the cities and, have a day on the farm. My farm is not there yet because I'm at the very early stages, but my aim is that once I've got the infrastructure in place, and clearly that's my cost, but again, it's my asset. So I see that as building my asset, refencing and, having energy. I'm trying to make my energy costs very low by having, gravity fed water, and I have solar power and all those things. They're actually good for me too. So it's not a sunk cost. It doesn't go nowhere. I've actually had to transform my farm to create this care farm, and I get the asset in the end that's an improved asset. So although I'm paying the infrastructure, it does add to the value of the farm. And then I use volunteer work. The volunteers come and help me do the work. So I think I'm probably going to break even. I think that's what I'm hoping to do, which for me would be a great outcome. Now, if I decided to open a cafe or start having merchandise, I don't know, maybe, who knows, and visitors, or if I put up a few cabins, I might be making money out of this. I don't know. That's not why I'm doing it, but I think it's possible.
Thank you so much. Yes, and I wanted to say as well, I've worked with a program with horses with children on the spectrum, and the guy who runs it had said to me, it's not about, like, obviously cost is a thing, but it's not about cost. He said, I've enjoyed my own farm more than I ever have after having individuals there to share it with, which I think is just a beautiful thing. Someone put that on a bumper sticker. We've got a question here from Fiona, which sort of fits in nicely with that funding question as well. Is the NDIS interested in funding clients to work on care farms?
Well, again, that's a very Australian-based question. So interesting. So I'm working with agencies that are funded by the NDIS. So one of the ways I'm managing the occupational health and safety is to, originally I thought, I'll just have people here and I'll manage all that. But I found it much easier to work with agencies that already had a file on each person. So they know their medical and health needs. They provide the carer support. They know the individual. And if I don't charge them, they can then charge the person through the NDIS scheme through their packages. So again, the group I had today, they would have, that's an agency that people choose to use through their NDIS package. And then they come out to me for the day with their carers. They come with their lunch, they come with the whole, or we do lunch here together, whatever we do, but they sort of shared for me the quite enormous task of managing a group of people with disabilities who you don't know on a farm for the day. It's not an easy task if you don't know the people. Hopefully, if they start coming regularly, I'll get to know each, as I have with others, get to know them individually. But initially, it's working with agencies who are NDIS funded, who do use their packages in that way. And it is a legitimate way to use their package if the aim of the package is to create, say for an autistic person, for community access is a legitimate aim, or for skills building. So I've just built a new shed and we're hoping to do some a little bit of trades training in there about fencing and welding and different things. We're again using agencies to manage some of that occupational health and safety, using professionals to volunteer their time. But again, skills building is a legitimate NDIS funded activity. So yeah, it is possible.
Absolutely, thank you. And a question that I have, tell me about volunteer engagement. How do you go about that? What does that look like?
Will I go? Okay, I'll go first. So this is something developing for me. As I said, I had actually hoped that I would finish my fellowship and see all these amazing care farms in Europe and then come back and start mine. But the 2-year delay meant that I just couldn't wait. So I'm only just really starting to develop this volunteer program. And I'm hoping within 12 months, I'll have a website operating where people can volunteer via the website, and the tasks will be, the skills we're looking for will be identified. People will match with the skills that we're looking for, and they will volunteer their time. And I have enough room that we can accommodate a couple of volunteers for each of the, so my care farm operates for 15 weeks twice a year. So it doesn't operate in the middle of summer, in the middle of winter. It operates for autumn and spring, or a bit of an extended autumn spring. And in those weeks, I'm hoping to have volunteers staying in to help me manage so that we can do more activities, whether it be a one-on-one walk with someone, or board games in the house, or whatever we're doing. If it's a wet day, we do an inside program. There's always something someone could do, and we all have skills to share. So I'm trying to set up a matching volunteer system, and already I have, I think, nearly 30 people who've volunteered and want to come, and I've just got to create for them what I'm asking them to do. But I'm very confident. What someone said before, I think it was you, Rose, actually it was you, Rose, of course, was how multi-layered this is. Actually, so far, the volunteers have got more out of it than the people who are visiting. I have no doubt about that, because coming and staying, they get to stay on the farm too, and they get to, eat the vegetables out of the garden and play with the animals and watch the ducklings hatch or whatever we're doing. And so they're like participants as well. And it is very multi-layered. I get so much out of it because I feel like my life is all this, that I've been doing in the dark, basically, an invisible farmer that I've been for 40 years, suddenly is a visible farmer. And I'm feeling that I'm actually telling people, yeah, this is how you do the fencing, you lie this out, and this is how this is how we do things. And it's given me a great pride in the farm and the history. It's given the volunteers, joy that they do after, and most of them are semi-retired or retired, and it gives the participants something. So more than that, it gives the community, and this is the work Joy's doing that I've only just lightly touched on, but I know all my neighbours are now saying, I'd like to help, and I can see it flowing through much broader than just, the one-on-one.
Thank you. And Joy, any thoughts to add to that question on volunteering?
Yeah, I think some places I spoke with, they absolutely use volunteers, others didn't. And I think it partially depends on your client group. So, for example, there was one farm that I spoke to that had some younger people and children who had experienced quite a lot of trauma. They felt it wasn't appropriate in their case because, well, one, because they felt that they needed kind of specialist support, professionals to support them, but also because they were really aware of confidentiality, and perhaps they were slightly concerned that maybe inadvertently volunteers might go back into the community and sort of say, oh, poor so-and-so, you know, you never guess what kind of background they've got. So I think volunteers can work really well. I think paid staff can work really well. I think you've got to look at the individual care farm and understand your client's needs.
Wonderful, thank you. And a question here for Joy. So from John, Judy described working with agencies in Australia. What does Joy's research indicate might be possible in the UK?
Sorry, say that again.
Judy has described working with agencies in Australia. I think John's referring to NDIS. What does your research indicate, Joy, might be possible in the UK?
So this concept that sort of Judy's talking about, sort of working with agencies, we do have it a little bit in the UK, although we wouldn't necessarily call them an agency, but we might say, for example, you know, a charity that supports young people and they look for placements for the young people, and the farm becomes a placement, and sometimes they send carers with them, or you would hope that they would send a carer with them, and it would be kind of a defined time, and that the farmer would be paid, you know, X amount, and that they'd be looking to do sort of certain activities. This was sort of something that was touched on by a number of participants. I think you know, that kind of agreement between the commissioner, the client, the farm, but sometimes it would be arranged directly. So, for example, from the local clinical commissioning group, or the local school, or the local council social care department. It wasn't necessarily always facilitated through an agency, as Judy refers, or perhaps an umbrella charity. So yes, I have seen that. I think where there'd been slight concerns raised during the research, and again, Judy touched on this earlier. So, for example, a charity that maybe does daycare services, and then they think, oh, wouldn't it be great if we did this on a farm? And they set up a farm, perhaps not understanding farming or having the agricultural background, and try to sort of run their services, but run it on a farm. And you know, people that I spoke to were not that keen on that model, because they felt that it didn't give the participants that kind of authentic farm experience. Yes, I mean, I could go into loads more, but I won't now.
Yes, I'm sure we could talk about this for hours, actually. I'm aware of the time, though, and we've got 2 more questions sitting here. So one for Judy. Hi, Judy. Could you share a little more about the structure of your care farm, specific to the integration of servicing neurodiverse individuals and families, services, activities, jobs, and other inclusive farm-related activities? And you did touch a little bit on that just before, including rainy day plans. Did you want to expand on that a bit?
Yeah, look, it's a bit of a new world, isn't it? I think I've been very lucky. I said I have a son on the spectrum, and I've worked with people on the spectrum for many years. So I'm not saying I'm not on the spectrum. I recognise they are the experts. So part of what I do is getting input from autistic adults into my program, and in fact, it's you know, I can't tell you how many of my autistic friends are part of, you know, my Brains Trust, telling me, you know, what might work, what might not work, and I know they're the experts. So that's what I rely on. And so part of what I've learned is simply being on the farm and doing nothing is perfectly okay. So it's not about having 50 activities and you get to the farm and you've got to do this, you've got to do that. For a lot of people, coming to the farm the first time is so confronting, just getting through a couple of hours or doing a very short visit, coming back for a longer visit, all those things. So I have, so my infrastructure is only part built, but the plans are all there. There'll be a sensory lawn that people can just go and lie, and look at the sky basically, and listen to the birds, so they're not necessarily activities. There's, picnic area. Mostly it's walks, just literally walking around the garden, seeing the different things that are growing, picking an orange, peeling it and eating it. It's not rocket science, this stuff. People think they have to create all these activities, but the day goes in an instant. We never get through what we have planned. By the time we've had a walk and a chat and, literally taken things slowly. And then if it's a game of table tennis we had today, it can be pretty much anything, and very self-directed. For autistic people, it needs to be self-directed because each person is so unique, and being overwhelmed is very easy for any of us. So yeah, I'm trying to listen and learn. I certainly haven't got it right yet, but I've got a few more years of learning and listening to get it right, I hope.
Thank you so much. Cheers. I've got one more question here. And I will mention that if you wake up in the middle of the night and you think of something you want to ask Judy or Joy, you can contact both of them via their fellow pages on each of the Trust's websites too. So don't fret if we finish up today and you think of something. Our last question is for Judy. It is an inspiration to hear you and see your farm. I agree, your farm is absolutely stunning. Can I ask if your background in education and disability has helped you to better understand how to charge for this special service and be sustainable?
Well, yeah, it should have. I mean, I taught economics for years, so I should actually be able to do this, but I haven't got my business plan perfected, I can assure you. But I think everyone's in a different situation. If I was 30 and I'm, a little bit older, a young person setting out farming and thinking this is what I want to do for the next 20 years, it would be really important to me to make this sustainable and a commercial operation that not only funded itself, but funded an income for me. If I felt I had to employ staff, I would have to earn or more staff than I do, because I do still have to obviously employ people to create the infrastructure and to do parts of the jobs. That I've been in a different position. So my business plan is probably very different to what another person's would be. And I think every care farm is different in that way. It's what stage of life you're at, what your aims are. I live here with my 91-year-old mother and my 2 dogs. So I don't have to feed, a large family. I have all, and I said I'm very self-sustaining in terms of that. So my needs are different to what other people starting out or a bit younger perhaps would be. However, I'm determined that I'm going to make this a business template, because I know it will not take off unless people can afford to do it. And we have to find ways in which that we can get an income stream into care farming. I don't think it's hard, because the things, and I'm looking at the time and I could ramble on forever, but I heard a story the other day about an open farm, and I won't name it, but what they charge to literally put people on a tractor and drive them around and show them the animals, I just fell off my chair. It was extraordinary. I mean, each person was like $20 an hour. They could fit 4 or 5 people on. And they had a waiting list of people that just wanted to have a tractor ride. So, there is a market there for people to learn about farming, and certainly a market for people to understand and the innovation of farming, what the bees, the composting, the soil carbon, which is just, such an important thing for us all, how we measure our energy flow. I hope that is more than just people coming to look at the animals. I hope it's people actually learning about farming. So I think there's a business model there that we have to create.
Fantastic. Thank you so much to both of you. And I'll hand back to Katie now to finish up the event for us.
Okay, perfect timing. Just thank you so much to both Joy and Judy and to yourselves for all your excellent questions. As Rose mentioned, you will be able to contact either Joy or Judy through their fellows pages on the Trust website. and we'll follow up with those links and with the recording. So that concludes our event today. Thank you so much for coming. Have a great week.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.